like to introduce our speaker today. Stan Riggs is the founder and director of NC, North Carolina Land of Water. You can find more information about that organization at nclandofwater.org. As a professor and researcher in geology at ECU, Dr. Riggs has been doing research on modern coastal ecosystems his entire career, and now that interest has brought him to create robust partnerships to improve the natural environment, honor cultural history, and increase ecotourism in the inner and the outer banks of North Carolina. Today, Dr. Riggs is going to talk more specifically about the Salmon Creek State Natural Area, which is a really awesome partnership that the Coastal Land Trust has been involved with, the state of North Carolina as well, as Bertie County, and lots of other partners. So very happy to have you with us today. And thanks for being here, Dr. Riggs, and look forward to hearing your story.
Well, welcome everyone. I hope somebody's ordered lunch and a drink so we can toast the oyster roast. I would much rather be out there at Salmon Creek eating oysters and talking about this and sitting in front of a computer, but it is what it is. So we can do a virtual toast to both last year's oyster roast and the one that we missed. So we're going to talk about the northeastern part of North Carolina today, which is an incredibly unique and very rich in natural and cultural resources. It's an area that's pretty exciting to me and has an incredible future. So let's a few words about North Carolina Land of Water. I've spent my career 55 years out on the waters of eastern North Carolina and other waters around the world, and water is my bag. And how water interacts with the land, and where water comes in contact with the land, where the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, contacts land, we have a coastal system. And this is a system, a very high energy system. It's where the ocean interacts, and all the dynamics of the ocean interact with the land mass. And it's an area of dramatic change. And one thing that we as a society up till recently have not learned how to live with this. We've sort of thought we could engineer our way through the changes that take place. But if you look at this picture on this slide, these trees out in the water, they did not grow in the water. Cypress trees cannot germinate underwater. They have to germinate on land. So if you see cypress trees in the water, they were on land not very long ago, and they're in the water now because sea level is rising. No matter what the naysayers say, sea level is rising, and we have hundreds of thousands of cypress trees surviving. Once they get a certain age, they can survive in permanent flooding. And so the shorelines of the Albemarle system are ringed with cypress trees because sea level is rising. It's dramatic evidence that change is going on. And when you see that, it should ring bells. I'm going to show a series of maps that are topographic maps. They're color instead of contour lines. This particular topographic map, the green part here is very low, and it gets higher as you go into the grays up here in the coastal plain. This shows the barrier islands out here, the estuaries. But this yellow line coming down here is an ancient shoreline. This is where the ocean shoreline was 125,000 to 75,000 years ago. All of this lower coastal plain was underwater and has formed basically since then. The estuaries, because we had water about 20 feet higher at that point, it was during the interglacial episode where the climate was a little bit warmer than it is today. The estuaries, the Albemarle Sound estuary It migrated upstream because we raised sea level 20 feet, and it migrated up almost all the way to the edge of the Piedmont, which is right here. So this was all water up here. This would be like the Neuse River and the Pamlico River or Albemarle Sound. So the estuaries still existed. They just moved upwards and inland further. This was the shoreline. Now this becomes important because this is high land back in here. This is low land out here. This is what we call the land of water. Then the climate started to cool. And by the time we got to about 30,000 years ago, it was cold enough to accumulate ice on top of the landmass of the northern portion of the hemisphere. And we built an ice sheet here that was up to 2 miles thick that covered the northern 2/3 of North America, portion of Northern Asia, and a large portion of Europe. All of that water, 2 miles thick water, had to come out of the ocean. So where did the shoreline go? If the ocean dropped down, the shoreline off of North Carolina was out here. It was 15 miles off of Cape Hatteras, off the continental shelf. It was 50 miles off of Nags Head, 60 miles off of Wilmington out here, at 410 feet below sea level. And we know that because we've done a lot of work out there, and we've mapped oyster beds and peat beds all across the continental shelf and the coral reefs out here off of Florida. When sea level was lower, we produced the shoreline out here, a coastal system. And then with time, as we came out of the glacial ice period, when the climate got warmer, starting about 15,000 years ago, it got warmer and warmer. The ice melted, it retreated back, the water flowed back into the Atlantic Ocean, and sea level has been rising ever since, flooding, reflooding the old portion of the coastal plain until we get to where we are today. And this is today's map. It shows where the shoreline was out here. It was off the edge of off that black line right there, off the edge of the continental shelf, 410 feet. It's now sitting right up here, has built our barrier islands in the last 3,000 years. There's nothing older than 3,000 years, Buxton Woods and Kitty Hawk Woods, and it's flooded up the Roanoke River to produce Albemarle Sound. This line right here, let's see what this line right here is the line of the Suffolk shoreline, comes down here and forms the main highway through Beaufort and Moorhead, goes on down to Wilmington, and all of this up here was estuary. This is what we call the land of water, the Suffolk shoreline, the fall line where the coastal plain grades into the old basement rocks of the crystalline surface, and the outer banks continental shelf. So the coastal plain used to be twice as wide as it is today. So the North Carolina land of water is characterized by everything, let me back up a slide here, everything from down here at Shackleford Banks up to the Virginia line, and this red line that goes up the river valleys and the Suffolk shoreline. That's what is defined as the North Carolina's coastal land of water. And it's characterized by 175 miles of barrier islands, inlets, and capes, which we're all familiar with. This talk is not going to deal with those today, but that's the resource. And 56% of the barrier island system is in national seashore and wildlife refuges and parks. In public lands, which is what we're going to talk about today when we talk about Salmon Creek. Inside the barrier islands, we have 3,500 square miles of the most incredible estuarine waters in the world. There's no place like this coastal system in the world. And in those estuaries, if you paddle your canoe or kayak along every little digital little creek and embayment, end up with over 10,000 miles of estuarine shoreline that's made up of swamp forest and marshes. We have 4 major drainage basins draining into this coastal system. This is truly the land of water. And what's really neat about it, if we look at a species diversity map, the red and purple here are the areas of highest numbers of species. And if you look at the coastal plain out here, where all the red and the purple is, that is the land of water. Right here is the highest species diversity in the state of North Carolina, bar none, and it's one of the largest and best sets of ecosystems that we have in the whole coastal system of the United States. It's really incredible the numbers of birds and animals and plants and so forth that we have out here. Now, as a member of the North Carolina Land of Water, we've been working with a lot of the counties, the towns, the villages, the different regions of out here in northeastern North Carolina, with respect to what are their natural resources, what is the cultural history, and how can they put this, how can the local villages put this to work? And we've been working directly with Bertie County now for the last 2 or 3 years, along with many other areas. But for the Bertie County area, we call this the Bertie Water Crescent. Bertie County is this area in here. It's the Bertie Peninsula that sticks down here. It's surrounded by the Chuan River estuary here, the Albemarle Sound, which is the Drowned River, Roanoke River estuary. Along the entire southern shore and western shore of Bertie County is the Roanoke River. And then the central part of Bertie County is dissected by the Kashai River and all of its tributaries. This drainage system right here is the Kashai River. There are all sorts of other little, Kashoke Creek is this little guy here, Black Walnut Creek, and then Salmon Creek comes up here. The red, let me point out, this is part of what we call the Wicomico Terrace. It's a flat plain up here. The green is the Talbot Terrace. It's a flat terrace, and they're sitting in there like this. And the streams are all cutting into this. And not only do we have these bigger streams like the Kashai that cut into this platform here, and the Salmon Creek that comes all the way up here. These are the headwaters for Salmon Creek. And these little ravines that are cut into this thing. I'm going to talk more about ravines in a few minutes, because the ravines are absolutely incredible ecosystem. And down here in Salmon Creek, we have a bunch of ravines, one of the things that makes it significant natural area. But we defined for Bertie County 5 water hubs, which represents their, in our opinion, represents their future for development of ecotourism at a national level. Windsor, we labeled the Windsor Water Hub, which has a head start on it, developing ecotourism. They have tree houses, boat ramps. They have lots of hiking trails and boardwalks that run through these swamps up here. And it connects ultimately through this Blackwater stream, a world-class Blackwater stream that comes down here the Kashai River to the Sans Souci ferry, where there's a boat ramp and a little 2-car ferry and some camping platforms, and then drains into the Roanoke River down here, where we have Weeping Mary Water Hub up here. The Roanoke River is a major groundwater river that comes off the Appalachian Mountains. It's a major river along the east coast of the United States. It's the largest river we have in North Carolina. And then we have the Salmon Creek Water Hub, which is sitting on this little peninsula between the Salmon Creek and the Chuan River here, and I'll come back to that in a second. We have a 5th one up here in Coleraine, which we're just beginning to develop. And one of the interesting things with all this water and all this shoreline down here, there was never any public access along here at all. And the people in Bertie County hardly knew what this river was, what the Chuan River was, because they couldn't get to it. And so one of our goals here was to develop several water hubs which provide public access to these, to the system. So in 1586, the colonists came over from England, and they put their rowboats in these big rowboats called wherries. They put them in the Albemarle Sound. They brought 29 men, paddled up the Albemarle Sound, and they were looking for gold. They were looking for gold and copper on up here in what they thought was going to be the mountains and so forth. They got here, and they started up the Roanoke River, and it was in March. And you will not ever be able to paddle a rowboat up the Roanoke River in March, because you got spring thaw and that water just roars down there. In fact, it's often in flood for large parts of the spring. They called it the River Mortucka, which means River of Death. So they didn't get very far, but this land right there at the mouth of the Roanoke River and the Chuan River and at the headwaters of Albemarle Sound was beautiful high land. And if you paddle a canoe along this area or riding a boat along here, you're going to want to go ashore. And I'm sure they went ashore. There should be evidence of these people here, and there is. We're not going to talk about that right now, but we will talk about what this land is that we call this Salmon Creek Natural Area. This is Highway 17. It goes over to Edenton, the big bridge across to Edenton right here. And this land right here, the 147 acres that's outlined in yellow here, was bought several years ago by Bertie County. And it was bought for the sole reason that the people, the public in Bertie County, had no place to swim. They had no place to get to the water unless they had big boats. And most of the population didn't have boats. In fact, we have several generations of people who have been removed from the waters of North Carolina, which is one of the serious problems, is that they don't have a relationship to our environment anymore. And so Bertie County purposely bought this 147 acres to provide a swimming beach and a recreational area on the water for its people. And I'll come back to that in a second. In the meantime, the Coastal Land Trust came down here and bought this piece of land, this 995 acres. We're going to just call it 1,000 acres. And they proceeded to purchase this land and turned it over last year to the state parks as a natural area. It runs along the Salmon Creek here for miles. You can see the difference in the vegetation here. This is all swamp forest. It's beautiful cypress, gum, swamp forest, floodplain along this Blackwater Creek that our proposal is to put a boat ramp up here. We have a boat ramp down here, and there's a beautiful day paddle along this Blackwater Creek. In the process of purchasing this land and working with the Coastal Land Trust, the Bertie County property here, the Coastal Land Trust here, in one of our meetings, we said, well, what about this 300 acre that's between these areas? Is this available for sale? Is there any way we can get this to tie these together so that we have a unique sequence of properties here where we can have cooperative programs developed between state parks and the county? And so the Coastal Land Trust went to work to buy this piece of land, and as of June 1, I'm told that the land will be turned over to, it has been purchased, and it'll be turned over officially to the state parks as a part of the Salmon Creek Natural Area. So let's take a quick look at the Bertie County property. It comes up this little creek over here, and this is what we call a ravine. And it's a deep ravine. Remember, this land is a flat tabletop. It's all around here, wherever it's been farmed and tree farms and so forth, it's flat. And then we get this ravine that's deeply incised into this land, flows into it's stream fed usually. You'll notice ponds here where the farmers in the past have dammed these up for irrigation water and mill dams. Almost all of the farms in this part of the world had mill dams on them. And there's 2 of them on this property. And when we look at the shoreline that runs from here down to the southern end of Salmon Creek, we're looking at 1.5 miles of water that's looking directly down the Albemarle Sound, 75 miles to the backside of Kitty Hawk. It's absolutely awesome to stand here and look down that system. I'll show you some more slides of this in a minute, but this is the new property that the Coastal Land Trust has just turned over. And there's another ravine that separates that property from this property. Now these ravines are pretty awesome. This is what Bertie County wants to do with their property. They want to put it into a recreational center. They want to have swimming, they want to have hiking trails, picnic shelters for the public to recreate and to get back to the water. And so they've already had a very successful opening with black and white people, just by the hundreds and hundreds coming out to enjoy the water. And it's and we're going to put lots of signage up here in this property for public education purposes. The Salmon Creek property, this little development here of ball gray, that's all that's in the way here, this whole thing. And otherwise, everything in this picture here is basically Salmon Creek. So it's flat tabletop. There's another ravine that comes over here and runs into the Salmon Creek floodplain off the map. There's beaches down in here. There's a kayak ramp in here, an old one. There's a big dock that sits in here. The in-between land, the piece that's under acquisition, being acquired right now, sits here, and it shows the beach comes down here, and this ravine comes in, forms a little headland here, or delta that sits out there. So these ravines are 30, 40 feet deep, and they're steep, and they're covered with mature forest, hardwood forest. This particular property had been completely logged, and one of the problems was in acquiring the property as well, the organizations that provided money weren't interested in logged over land. They wanted significant ecosystems. Well, this right here is a significant ecosystem, and up these ravines, those have not been cut, and they usually have beautiful hardwood forests associated with them, some very large trees. The beaches here are totally inaccessible except by water. This is an area that we can revegetate and turn into a prairie. We can put in longleaf pines, and we're working with the Park Service now, trying to plan some of the activities that'll go into that area. The lower Salmon Creek property is characterized when you enter the property by a farm field here. The big century oak out here. This is looking out over the water, the Albemarle Sound. This is down at the beach, and this is back up Salmon Creek. And it's got a high diversity of ecosystems associated with it. On the water, we've got a nice sand beach. However, it is eroding. You've got 75 miles of Albemarle Sound there that when you put a storm surge, 8, 10-foot storm surge, that water comes up here, way up on the bank. You put 6-foot waves on it with 100-mile-an-hour wind, and it just pummels the shoreline. That little slump block happened just a month ago in response to a little nor'easter that happened out there. But the reason you have a sand beach here is because the bank is eroding. Well, all of that sand, 100% of it comes from this bank. And this, of course, causes problems for the public. The public says, well, we can't stand to have our land eroding away that we paid so much money for. We need to harden the shoreline. And the conflict is if you harden that shoreline, you will lose your sand beach, period. There's only 6 inches, 10 inches of sand on top of a sticky clay there, and you won't have anybody wanting to swim in there if you stabilize this beach. There is no other source of sand. Nature stabilizes it with slump blocks, and if you're left alone, it'll revegetate, waiting for the next big storm. The next big storm will take this out, and it'll erode back again. So it goes in jumps as it erodes back. But we've lost a lot of land there, but that's the way the natural system works, and that's the way these storms work, and we have to learn to live with those storms. So a big education is taking place right now with the public of Bertie County is how do we manage some of this property? Here's a closer up view of one of these ravines, and that's all natural wetland vegetation, and the banks are covered with large growth, largely because they're so steep they were never logged. And so this is a really incredible system. There's a few pictures down in the ravine that show the topography. I rolled down that hill. That's steep enough so that you will trip and fall down. And then where these ravines come out into the water, you've got a swamp that's being flooded by rising sea level again, because we're flooding back up this creek now a little bit. And out in front, there's a delta. And there's a cypress fringe that forms around these deltas because the floodplain is full of cypress, and with the recession of the shoreline, you leave that cypress out there in the water as the shoreline retreats. And so these form little headlands because they semi-protect the bank from eroding back there. They trap the sand and hold the sand in there, as you see right here. Here comes a spring running out to this thing, and you have little miniature barrier islands and everything forming here. It's classic. Well, our proposal to Bertie County and to the state parks people is to take this area right here and turn this into what we call the Bertie Water Crescent. And since the Coastal Land Trust turned this over to the state parks as a natural area, that means that you can't have visitor centers, you can't have big parking lots, you can't have the things that you can have in a normal state park. The only thing you can do is have primitive trails and education programs. And so we've proposed a Rivers to Sound education program where we put a regional K through 12 field education center on the Salmon Creek part of the property and integrate that with the the Bertie property and their recreation center. So you do the recreation on the Bertie property where we can do anything up there, but we have limits to what can be done on the Salmon Creek property. So to put it to its use as a natural area, we think that this idea of a field education center there is really crucial. We just finished running a year-long program with the science teachers in Bertie County in order to sort of get a feel for for this whole thing. And this business, we titled that program, What's in Your Backyard? And we took the teachers on these field trips. And most of the teachers who were from that area hardly knew that area. It was all foreign to them. We presented the idea of rivers to sounds to the teachers. Would you use this? And would your students? Yes, 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 yes. That's all we got. And so we've proceeded trying to put that together. And our little friend Corona here has sidetracked us right now. We aren't able to make a whole lot happen because the governor won't talk with us at the moment for obvious reasons. But what we propose here is to teach natural resources, the environment, ecology, geology, archaeology, astronomy, water quality, climate change, storms. The cultural history goes from the Native Americans, Europeans, African Americans. It's all here. It's in the record. It's on the ground. There's an incredible history to this area. Most people don't know this, but back in Revolutionary times, there was a big Native American reservation after the war that we had from 1711 to 1713 with the Native Americans. Well, there's a tremendous village sites that were on these lands. There's historic features, and then the regional industries, hunting and fishing and ecotourism. Those are big and going to get bigger. And agriculture and silviculture. Our proposal is to put a day camp, start out simple with day camps. Rivers to sound outdoor classrooms with just some simple facilities, and work towards, in a few years, the development of a multi-day program in which we have an indoor classroom and cabins for 6 students and a advisor with kitchen and so forth in these cabins. It's a beautiful cabin and all about water. So we have to have boats. We have to have boats, kayaks that run the blackwater streams. We have to have little bigger boats to get in the bigger waters, and even bigger boats to get out in ALBEMARLE Sound. And the goal is to get this generation of young people back on the water, back into the wildness, to the wilderness, and to preserve what we've got with respect to this. So let's put in an observatory out there. There's nothing more spectacular than standing on the edge of that shoreline on the bluff, looking 75 miles down ALBEMARLE Sound at the dark night sky on a new moon. It just blows your mind. And there's this historical, tremendous cultural history, as I've already mentioned, Native Americans, the colonial, and then the more recent history associated with navigation and shipping. Archaeology is big out there. I think you're going to have the next lunch talk is going to be by these people who are doing the digging for the different historical evidence out on these properties. Shipbuilding, fishing, the oystering, navigation. This is all old industries that are almost gone. Flooding and storms, which continuously impact eastern North Carolina. The town of Windsor gets swamped all the time. Put equipment out there so that the kids can understand what weather is and how weather drives the system, how winds and storm surges and tides work. And the most incredible thing is this is the state's newest state park or state natural area right here. And if we look at the land of water here, we have 10 U.S. Fish and Wildlife refuges out here. We have 9 state parks, 4 national parks, 1 national forest, and 56% of that barrier island is public domain. And what's not on this map is all the other lands that the Nature Conservancy and that the North Carolina Coastal Land Trust has purchased. Now, I put this one on here because this was turned over to the state parks. But Coastal Land Trust has been an awesome program here in acquiring lands all over this particular region here, preserving the ecosystems that exist out here. This is a, as I've said before, and I'm going to say it again, this is a world-class water system. It's unequaled anywhere in the world, and I've worked on water all over the world. This is our future right here. And it's, other than the Outer Banks, the inner banks here are not very well known. Most people don't realize how significant this system is. So it's all about a water vision. And Salmon Creek right here has a big part in this. And if we can get the rivers to sound started here, our ultimate goal is to develop the Bertie Watercressant National Water Trail. And I've always been advised not to, I like to think big. And I think of all of northeastern North Carolina for this National Water Trail, everybody says, no, we got to start small and you develop into that. So let's start right here. Let's get this recognized by the National Park Service as world-class water system, and then ultimately evolve into the entire northeastern North Carolina water system. And the Coastal Land Trust, Nature Conservancy, the various federal state agencies have been awesome in recognizing this potential. And with everybody's help, we can make that happen. Thank you, and enjoy northeastern North Carolina.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, I'm sitting here, I have chills. Thank you very much for sharing your vision and expertise and passion for this region of North Carolina. It's really awesome. Wondering if anybody in the audience has questions for you, for Dr. Riggs. If you do, feel free to hit the unmute button and ask it, and we'll just try to kind of take turns if there are lots of questions.
May I begin?
Absolutely.
I'm Alistair McDonald. I'm with the First Colony Foundation that's been doing the work, the archaeology. We've been looking at that cliff at the beach access.
Right.
And I was sort of expecting that something could be done about that. I think you're saying that that it's essential really to leave it in its natural state.
Do I just respond?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Now, there's another side to that. Everything you're digging up there on the surface, if that cliff is moving back, everything that you're digging up there in the past has already fallen in the water.
Yes.
And so if you think in terms of, let's look down the bottom side down here, we ought to find some evidence of what has happened in the loss. And based on what we know about the rate of recession of that shoreline, where you're digging right now was not the shoreline 300 years ago. The shoreline was way out here. So big things probably are long gone. And reconstructing that is going to take a little sort of a different approach, because it's not like an inland property where it's stable and things don't change very fast. This is partly because of where it is. It is every single major hurricane, and I'm talking about the big ones, not all of them, but the big ones will produce anywhere from 6 to 10 foot storm surge back there. And that shoreline all the way up to into the upper Chuan River is just melting back. And we watched half a dozen hurricanes take out big chunks of that. And hurricanes have been going on since the 1700s, and long before that. And so from an archaeological point of view, I think I'm not an archaeologist, but my guess is that what you're going to find is things other than the big structures that might have been there. You're going to get stuff that's in the back and in the backyards, so to speak. But that's something we ought to talk about. If one spends any time walking those beaches, you should have a good idea of what's coming out of that surface layer that you're working.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions at this time? If there are no other questions, I would like to say thank you again to you, Dr. Riggs, for being with us today and for really just giving us an in-depth look at this area and the potential and your vision and passion for making it the very best that it can be.